All right. Hey guys, welcome back to the Chuckload of Comics continuing coverage of Ace Comic-Con. Chuckload of Comics sponsored by Clark Street Dog, guys. Here joining us in the booth, the gentleman responsible for my favorite toy and just about everybody else's favorite toy in the 1980s, the G.I. Joe, Mr. Larry Hama himself. Larry, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. How's Chicago treating you this weekend? The weather's been cold.
All I've seen is Rosemont in the airport.
Well, that's good, man. I was so glad that you came to Ace Comic-Con. I've been wanting to meet you for the longest time. It's kind of hard to put into words what you've done and like how responsible you were for all of our childhoods. Playing with G.I. Joes. I mean, it was the number one toy when we were all kids. And I want to just kind of, for those of you who sort of don't know the story of the G.I. Joe character, really quickly, back in the 1960s, the Hasbro company decided they were going to make sort of a Barbie for boys. And it was a bit of a gamble. They rolled the dice, and it was massively successful up until, like, you know, the 1970s. The brand kind of fizzled out until the beginning of the 1980s. The Star Wars, little tiny Star Wars action figures were just crazy popular. And it said, hey, you know what? We can make small plastic figures and sell them to boys and some to people in the 1980s when they're going to buy them. So G.I. Joe was kind of birthed from that. I know you've told this story just about 1,000,000 times in your career. Can you kind of take us back to that Hasbro pitch when you were working at Marvel? Like, how did this... Tell us about the relaunch of G.I. Joe in the 1980s.
Well, it came about because of the oil crisis. You know, the price of plastic just went through the roof.
Oh, wow.
So making these 12-inch figures became very sort of impractical.
Right.
And they looked around, they saw the Star Wars figures, and they said, hey, you know, we can do that. And they said, well, we've got G.I. Joe. Let's make them G.I. Joes. So what happened was that the reason they came to Marvel was that there were network rules about commercials.
Uh-huh.
So you couldn't do a toy commercial that had more than, I think, 5 seconds of animation.
Really?
You had to actually show the actual toy.
Yeah.
And they thought, wow, if we could only have like a 30-second fully animated, really...
Explosions
and stuff blowing up, and, you know, lasers and all that. That would be really great. And they couldn't do it.
Oh, man.
Right? But one guy at Hasbro figured out that because of the First Amendment,
Yeah.
right, you couldn't restrict advertising on a publication.
Right, literature
smart.
is free reign.
Right, so they came to Marvel and they said, well, we'd like to license, like to have you do the licensed comic.
Genius.
Okay. Now you have to understand that in the late 70s, licensed comics to the people who make comics, that was the bottom of the barrel.
Right.
Right.
Because the licensing fee came right off the top of the page rate.
Oh, wow.
So no B-list, no A-list talent would work on licensed comics. Right? So then the editor-in-chief went from office to office and asked every editor and assistant editor and the kid that went out for coffee. And even the kid that went out for coffee turned in.
Oh, no.
And my office was the last. I was an editor at Marvel. My office was the last one in the row.
Oh, my goodness.
And because I wanted to get writing work, I've been drawing comics for 20 years. Couldn't get any writing work.
Wow.
Because there was this really hard prejudice against the artists drawing their own material, and I really wanted to write for one main reason, that the first comic I did for Marvel was Iron Fist, okay, and this was in the early 70s. My page rate was $23 a page.
What?
For full finished pencils.
Oh, my God.
And it would take me all day to draw, one page.
$23 a day.
And then I looked at the writer, and the writer was making $50 a page.
Oh, my
right?
goodness.
Plus he was writing 3 scripts a week.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
He can juggle a lot at the same time.
So I'm looking at this and going,
I'm in the wrong business.
how do I get a slice of that?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? So they offered me, the last thing I wanted to do was a military comic.
Yeah.
I got into the business because I'm a duck man. I wanted to draw funny animals.
Oh, nice.
And if they had offered me Barbie, I would have taken Barbie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I took it.
Yeah.
And
I want to ask you, like, okay, so when they brought it to you, did they have any of these characters already like laid out for you, or was it just
G.I. Joe.
just it's G.I. Joe? They used to look like this in the '60s. Make it fun.
well, they had 10 drawings. They were black and white drawings, and they were labeled infantry and mortar guy
Really?
and commando.
Wow. And they probably all look the same too, right? Like the drawings probably all look the same.
Ron Rudat, who was the designer at Hasbro, really did a good job.
Okay.
Under the amazing restrictions that he had.
Sure.
You know, I mean, they told him he had to make one of the figures be completely one color. That was to save money on the paint.
Oh
Okay.
my goodness.
So that's how Snake Eyes came to be.
I
Snake
didn't
Eyes.
know
It was
that.
completely black.
So the
Yeah.
most popular character
The most
in the
popular
entire G.I.
character.
Joe franchise was a
Was-
cost-saving measure.
Yeah, he was the cheapest one to produce.
That's
Wow.
that's wild.
That is wild. That's crazy.
So
and they only had the one female character,
Yeah.
Scarlet. And I said, well, how come there's no other female characters? And they said, well, a 9-year-old boy, you know, can buy a guy that's a figure. It's an action figure.
Right.
But if it's a girl, that's a doll.
that's a doll. And what boy is going to buy a doll?
Right.
What-
Yeah.
No boy is going to buy a doll at that point. And I said, well, that's kind of, how do I fix that? You know,
Yeah.
and in the first issue, I realized that all the Cobra characters didn't have faces.
Right.
They were completely covered.
That's
And,
hilarious.
you know, how do you have, you know, drama without
Having names and
expression?
characters. Yeah.
Right,
Right. Yeah.
no agents of expression?
Right.
So I said, well, I'll make up a character that has no mask so we can see reactions.
Yeah.
And why not make it a girl?
Make it a girl.
Nice.
And while I'm at it, let's have her, you know, have a sexy black leather outfit.
Also,
Boys
cost,
might actually buy that one.
and also
They
cost
did,
effective, right?
right.
Because it's one color, so you're still saving money.
Exactly.
So we're talking about Baroness, right?
Yeah, the Baroness, and they were like, but the reaction from the comic was so good that, you know, they came out with a figure.
Oh my gosh.
But otherwise, they weren't going to do it.
Wow.
Wow. That is such an amazing story.
So, I mean,
That
did
is
you
so
know
cool.
going into it that Snake Eyes, somebody like that? Because this is, I mean, if you think about G.I. Joe, you think about real American hero, but then you introduce this ninja character into this almost U.S. military universe. Was that sort of your idea to introduce someone with a samurai sword where everybody else has got a bazooka? And like, how did that, did that come from you or?
Oh, yeah, because it didn't really, he didn't have a sword at first.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What happened was that they brought in Storm Shadow.
Right.
And I looked at it and I said, wait a second, you know, he's the only Asian character in the whole G.I. Joe universe, and he's a bad guy. You know, I mean, that didn't sit well with me.
Right.
So I came up with this plan to change him into a good guy over the course of a year
Nice.
and not tell Hasbro.
Way to go.
And, you know, the thing is, I write the stuff page by page.
Mhm.
I have, you know, I have no idea what's on page 5 till I get to page 4. And, you know, a lot of these things happen completely by accident. You know, like they were behind the schedule and they needed to crank out an entire issue in like 3 weeks. So that's how number 21, the silent issue, happened.
Right.
Is I said, well, if I don't have lettering, we save an entire week.
You churn it out in no time.
Right.
Right?
And if I draw it and write it myself, saves another 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And so it was necessity.
Yeah.
It's the mother of invention, right?
Right?
And
And it's one of the more memorable issues in that first run.
but I got halfway through it, and both Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes tear their sleeves, and all of a sudden you could see their forearms. And I said, well, what can I do with that? And I said, well, I'll give them both the same tattoo.
There you go.
Nice. That's so cool.
I had no idea what the tattoo meant, or why they both had it, But 3 or 4 issues later, I had to come up with the whole backstory.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
And again, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Nothing was planned out.
yeah.
That is
Well,
so
that
cool.
brings me to my next point, because so the comic book launched, then the cartoon launched, and then the storylines that everybody watched every Saturday morning started to unfold. How much of the comic book storyline influenced the cartoon, or how much of the cartoon storyline had to influence the comic?
I've never seen any of the animation.
Oh, really?
Wow, that's surprising.
So if they kill somebody off in the cartoon, do you have to kill them off in the comic book? Well, not that they killed anybody off much in the comic book.
I did it under duress once.
Yeah.
Really?
They killed off Cobra Commander in one, I think, some Cobra La movie or something.
Yeah, the
which
film.
I'd never seen, but I said, that's a real big mistake.
Yeah.
And we lost something like 25% of the readership.
Wow.
They said, I would never buy the comic again.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I brought them back after a year.
Yeah.
And,
Nice.
it was always a battle like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I would have to quit sometimes and they'd hire me back.
Of
Really?
course.
For real?
Wow.
Or they would fire me.
How many times did that go down?
I think they fired me off the file cards 2 or 3 times.
Really?
Yeah, every time a new product manager would come,
They'd
onto-
hire you back.
They'd go, well, why are we paying this Hama character to write these things when we can get some kid in the production department to write them?
I want to talk to you. You bring up the file cards. People may not know that you wrote the file cards on the back of, if you're a kid and you go into the store, you go into Toys R Us and you go to get a G.I. Joe, the very first thing you did
Just read the
was take
backstory.
that box, that card, flip it over, read it, and that's how you would decide what G.I. Joe you wanted to buy.
Right.
And you wrote those.
And I named the characters.
And you
Yeah,
named the
and you
characters.
named the characters.
Yeah, and that didn't exist before that.
Yeah.
And now it's a sort of a standard in the toy industry that you have an action figure, you have to have
A backstory.
a file
A name.
card on the back of the card. Yeah.
Yeah.
All because of you.
It's amazing. It's
I know.
an absolutely incredible story. We could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. Now you got to get back to your table. But the comic book is still running.
Yeah.
Are you still working on the comic? I know. Or are you coming back to it?
I'm still writing it.
Yeah.
I'm up to issue 270.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. That's
Wow.
incredible.
So where's a good place for people to jump on in if they've never gotten into the G.I. Joe comic book? Just jump right in right now?
I try to make it so that anybody can. That was the one thing, innovation that I tried to bring to it right from the beginning, was to have overlapping plots and subplots, so that if a kid picks up an issue, there might be some stuff in there that he might not get without reading
Yeah.
the previous issues, but there's always something else starting. And because I looked around at the other Marvel stuff, the X-Men was like impossible to jump in on.
Yeah, I know.
It was impossible to read. You had to you had to follow every single X-Men comic in the 90s if you
Right.
wanted to get the whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I decided I tried to fix that way. The other innovation that was sort of radical at the time was I had no captions and thought balloons.
Okay.
And people were going, "You got no captions and thought balloons?" And I said, "Yeah, well, they kind of suck."
And then they fired you again.
Well, I thought it was like lazy storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said, if you go see a movie, there's not some voice saying, "And meanwhile,"
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
That's why I tried to write the stories so that all the storytelling was in the visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I come from the drawing side of it, and and I remember I did one story once where I spent a whole day drawing this really detailed background, the Himalayas with these clouds and rays of sunlight coming through the clouds and birds flying out of this green valley.
Oh, no.
Right? And the writer put in something like 12 caption boxes that covered up all that stuff.
The entire work of art.
Oh my God.
And all that was in the captions was descriptions of all the stuff that he covered up. And I went,
you fixed it, right? You
Why?
fixed it. Yeah,
Why,
that makes no
dude?
sense.
Why?
so that taught me a lesson. I said, I'm not going to do that.
Wow. Well, that's incredible. I mean, what an amazing story. I know you got to
Oh
get back.
my goodness.
Last little story. And I know we don't have to make it a long one, but just the name Cobra is a really funny story about how the name Cobra came to be in like a pitch meeting.
Well, we were at a meeting. It was like me and Jim Shooter and Archie Goodwin, who was a really terrific writer, and a couple of the licensing guys. And we were looking at the whole line, and we said, "So, where are the bad guys?" and the Hasbro guy says, "Well, we don't have any." And we said, "Well, what are the Joe's going to do? Like, are they just going to march?
Hang out at a bar?
Yeah. So they said, "Oh, well, okay." And then we said, "Well, let's come up with some sort of, villainous organization, And Archie Goodwin piped up, and he said, "Well, Shield has what's it called?
Hydra.
Hydra,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And they're like a paramilitary sort of fascist organization, And why don't we just have something called off the top of my head, Cobra?" And everybody went, "Okay."
That was it.
Simple
That was
as
it. It was very simple.
It just changed the animated in the comic book world forever.
And yet again, you came up with that.
No, I didn't come
No.
up
Oh,
with
no,
it.
I'm
was in
sorry.
the pitch
Sorry.
meeting.
That's right. You were in the meeting, though.
It was Archie Goodwin.
That's
Oh.
right. That's funny.
And it was sort of a throwaway line.
That's too funny, man.
That's awesome.
So many amazing stories, man. Larry, I could talk to you all day. I know you got to get back, but I really want to thank you for coming by the Truckload of Comics
Yes.
booth, sharing this history with us. And yeah, just thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank
Very
you.
absolutely, man.
This is fantastic.
we have
we actually
have
have
an
a
audience question.
Yeah, it's just not.
It is.
It's not so much a question, but just a comment. You are probably the reason that I started reading comics. Your run on Wolverine as a writer it's still to me very definitive. But it was the reason I became a monthly consumer as opposed to just picking up whatever some uncle gave me at Christmas. You know what I mean? And I just want to thank you for that. I mean, it really is. I think it's still my favorite iteration of the character was that, what is it, 31 to 50 or something like that. It was some of my favorite writing.
It was 8 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
I loved it. It was great. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. You have another question?
I also wanted to thank you. Growing up watching G.I. Joe's, loved it. Did you have anything to do with Community's G.I. Joe episode?
Oh, interesting question.
Oh, the Community
TV
television show?
Community did a G.I. Joe episode. Like, it was drawn like the 80s were drawn. And were you any part of that?
Interesting. I
Have you
didn't
seen
know
it
that.
at all?
Never heard of
You
it.
should probably look it up
They
on
ripped
YouTube.
you off.
Yeah, no,
okay.
fantastic episode. They drew it just like it was in the 80s. But I just want to know if you were part of it. Yeah. No, you definitely do have to watch that then. I'd be very interested in actually knowing your opinion on that next time.
Community G.I. Joe
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it
like
sounds
the fifth-
like.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
fantastic
right?
episode. Fantastic.
So thanks for the comment,
Thank you.
man.
That's awesome.
Okay.
You should probably check that out because it sounds like they ripped off some of your,
A lot of your stuff. There's
artistry.
some licensing issues going on there over at NBC.
All right. Is that a wrap?
That's a wrap. Thanks, Larry. Really
Thank
appreciate
you
it, guys.
So much.
Okay.
Have
Thanks
a
for
good one.
checking
Have a good
out
one.
the show, guys, here on Truckload of Comics. Did you already stop?
Nope.
Okay. Thanks for being here, guys. We're here all weekend here at Ace Comic Con. Larry Hama. Join us here next time. See you later.
Thank you.